Hi, everybody. I hope you're there. I'm just going to try to set up the chat. Are we set up yet? It's still going around. Insert the yay. Hello. Hello, everybody. This is Lynn. And I'm going to stay on this page. Hold on. I'm just going to say hello. Hello. I hope you're all there. If you're there, check in and say hi to me. If you're just tuning in, this is Lynn Serafin. And I'm genealogist and founder of Trentino Genealogy, and today is the 10th of April, 2020. I'm going to move these things down so I can see who's checking in. Let's see, who's checking in? Hi, Robin. Hello, Jean. Hi, Susan. Hi, Linda. Hi. Another Susan. Gosh, all these people, I have to turn off these notifications, otherwise I won't be able to see what's going on. Great. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Today is Filo Friday. First of all, happy Easter weekend to those of you who celebrate Easter. It's beautiful, beautiful weather here in Britain, and it's going to be a little hard to stay in, so I'm hopefully take a walk. I'm not sure, but I hope everything is safe and happy where you are. Just want to repeat for those who may not know what Filo is. Filo Friday. Filo is a practice of traditional storytelling in Trentino where people would gather usually in the evenings between dinner and bedtime to share oral histories, legends, things they made up just to be creative and to bring the families together. And it's just a way of bringing everybody closer together and creating first of all, the transmission of histories, but also just bringing families together. So that's the purpose of what we're doing here. And the word philo comes from a verb for to spin, because that's when the women traditionally used to spin their yarns and threads while the men usually were telling the stories. But men also did handicrafts and things like that. But I also think it's a pun because it's just about spinning tales. I'm just saying that again because some of you may not have been here before. So today, as in other weeks, I've set up a couple of riddles. And hold on, let me just put my notes up on the screen. Hello, Louise from Santa Fe. Hello, Paul. Hello, Elaine. Hello, Arlene. Hi. So to get everybody engaged, as you know, I like to set up riddles. So the first riddle that I have asked, and what I'm going to ask you to do is, while I'm kind of explaining why I've asked it and the context of it, I'm going to ask the riddle and see if you can give your guesses in the chat. And so I can take a look at them after I set the little context. And so the first riddle is, aside from starting the Holy Roman Empire, that's the aside from, what did Emperor Charlemagne do that changed the way our Trentino ancestors lived for almost 1,000 years? Now, there's a lot of different answers to this question, but I have one specific thing in mind. Hi there, Wendy. So what do you think? What did Emperor Charlemagne do that changed the way our ancestors lived for about 1,000 years? Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Hi, Dolores. So put your guesses in there. And in the meantime, I'm going to give a little bit of background, because some of you may not even know who Emperor Charlemagne was, or maybe you heard about him in school, but you didn't know that much about him. Well, first of all, in Italy, he's called Carlo Magno, which means Charles the Great, or Carlo the Great, Carlo Magno. And Charlemagne essentially means the same thing, but we don't think about that. But he was called this because he was considered the Great. He was Frankish, as he's from what was then Gaul, or from France. He founded, yes, something called the Holy Roman Empire, but it wasn't actually called the Holy Roman Empire until much later. So yes, he did found it, but it got that title a couple of hundred years after the fact. So his original concept was to create something that was Roman in the fact that it was preserving the idea of the Roman emperors who were divinely ordained. Okay, so the Roman emperors were kind of they weren't godlike, they were considered gods. So the Roman emperor, since Charlemagne was a Christian, he couldn't say he was a god, but he could say he was ordained by God. So the concept was that he wanted to set up an empire where the ruler was considered to be ordained by God, and hence also to do that, he needed the Pope to sanction whoever the emperor was, to sanction the fact that the emperor was ordained. He needed the Pope to ordain him, in other words. So, and that's exactly what he did. Now, I'm not very good with dates. I I actually don't memorize dates very well. When I had to go to school and memorize dates, I wasn't very good at that. But here's a date that I think is very easy to remember, the date of Charlemagne's coronation, because it's just easy to remember. He was crowned by the Pope in Rome on Christmas night, so December 25th of the year 800. It's a really easy date to remember. Christmas Day, or night rather, not Christmas Eve, but Christmas in the evening in the year 800. So from 800, that's a really clear demarcation. I'm sure you remember that because it's such an easy date to remember. So, and the Pope at the time was Pope Leo III, or in Italy they say Leone III. So let's have a look. Oh wait, there's a couple of other things I wanted to mention about him before. Yes, Christmas Day, the common era. Yes, Robin knew that. Hooray! Couldn't come up with an answer. Is it related to his invasion of Lombardia? Yes, kind of, sort of, maybe. First of all, let me explain. This is where I was going. Keep guessing down there. He established Christianity as a state religion. Paula, actually, that was already done by Emperor Constantine in like the year 400. So it was already there. Paul Donati is guessing he created prince bishops. Actually, no, that happened 200 years later. So these are all really good guesses and they're all related, but that's not actually what happened in his lifetime. Now, the bit about Lombardia, let me explain. Charlemagne, the reason why he was so successful is that in the time when he invaded, a lot of northern Italy and that whole part of Central Europe was indeed occupied and owned and lived in by the Longobards, sometimes called Lombards, which is where we get the name Lombardia or Lombardy as in the province. Now, the Longobards there's some debate about where they actually came from. They either came from some part of northern Germany or even maybe Scandinavia. Lots of different people have different opinions, but they weren't Italian. They were from further north. So they came and they loved all of those areas where our ancestors lived. And in fact, many of our ancestors probably were Longobards because they didn't just vanish. They were settled there for quite some time. But what was going on is that they were threatening to they were becoming so powerful, they were starting to go down the Italian peninsula. And the Pope was afraid that they were going to take over the Papal States. So essentially, Charlemagne said, let me see if I can get the Pope on my side. And if I can get rid of the Longobards so that they're not threatening the Papal States and swear loyalty to the Pope, then that would be a pretty good thing. So that's essentially what he did. But he was very shrewd. I read a book about him, and I thought he's not all that saintly. He sounded pretty shrewd to me and kind of maybe a little shifty in some ways. He actually arranged to marry one of the daughters of one of the Longobard kings, ostensibly to create an alliance between the two peoples. Now, the Longobards were also Christians, but they were their own people. They didn't necessarily swear allegiance to the Pope. So anyway, he married the daughter, the princess, the Longobard princess. But as soon as he managed to invade them and throw them out and all this stuff and get what he wanted, he shipped her back off to her father, apparently. I think that's kind of interesting. But I read that in one of his biographies. Something else interesting about Charlemagne is that I read in a book, maybe some of you, I don't know if any of you watched the show, Who Do You Think You Are? But a few years ago, the American version had the actress was she an actress? She was a model anyway, Cindy Crawford was on there, and she had traced her ancestry, and they actually traced her back to Emperor Charlemagne. She's a descendant of Emperor Charlemagne. I thought, oh, wow, that's really cool, and she was very moved. However, I read a book a few years ago called A Short History of Everyone Who Ever Lived by British author, I think his name is Adam Rutherford, and he's a DNA specialist, genetic specialist, and he says actually anybody of broadly European descent is descended from Charlemagne. That means every single one of us. Now, proving it on paper is different from it being so genetically, but he says that statistically it's just a fact. It's like 99.9999% certain that you are, I am, we're all descendants of Emperor Charlemagne. So there you go. So that was 1200 years ago. So let's see. Hi, ciao, ciao, ciao. I'm seeing more people. He killed off all the gnomes. Yeah, that would be great. Probably did. Giselle? Yeah, he probably did. Constantine only made Christianity legal in the empire. Yes, that's what I said. What? Okay, well, anyway, he didn't create an empire. He made Christianity. Constantine actually, he actually was more leading to the east. And by this time that Charlemagne came in, the two branches of Christianity were split. So so now Charlemagne is trying to consolidate them and bring more focus on the Pope. So anyway, so the question is, again, getting back to the riddle, what did he do? I haven't actually answered the riddle yet. I gave you all of that. And I do have a, let me go back to where I have it. Yes, I do have my own take on this, what he put in. What he brought, he made it the state religion, is not that he made it not illegal. Are you talking about Constantine then, Robin? Okay, yes, you're correct about that. But it was yes, you're correct about that. He sanctioned it. But let's shift over to Charlemagne. So this isn't actually the point I'm trying to make. I'm not actually saying that I'm not actually focusing on the religious aspect. The answer to the riddle that I'm trying to bring in is this. What Charlemagne did is that he systematized what we call the feudal system, which in Italian is a feudo, 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 which also could be translated into fiefdom. But we always talk about feudalism, and we don't often necessarily know what that means. We think of it as maybe it was the age of nobility and underlings and that, and it's true, that is what it is. But what he did is he took an idea that was actually pre-existing. It was actually within the Longobard system and also in the Franco system, but he codified it and he created a new feudal system, very, very systematized, that was in a pyramid shape. And the pyramid shape went like this. So at the top, you've got the emperor, and the emperor was only giving his allegiance to the Pope. So he was ordained by God, and the Pope gave his sanction to him. So that was level one. And then when you go down to level 2, you have kind of the higher level nobility. You get the princes and the dukes, the marquises, the counts and the barons. So they're all like up here. And each of them, if you hear names like we say in English duchy, but it's actually duchi in Italian, those were the dukes. Say marquises, or they were heads of things called marcas, which actually Trentino at some point was a marca. The counts were counties. They were heads of counties. The princes, of course, were heads of areas that were included all of those things. So, okay, sorry. So now it's 7 a.m. Yeah, we went ahead. So sorry, Teresa. I didn't know that your time was changing, but welcome. So you've got the emperor. Then you've got the higher level nobility that I just mentioned. Now you've got the second level nobility. And a lot of you might recognize this level if you've done some research in your ancestry. The kind of the third level, you've got lords and, basically gentlemen who are going to call themselves signori, like that, the lords, and also military leaders, and also certain other kinds of nobles. Now, an awful lot of our Trentini ancestors will be various kinds of rural nobility. They'll have kind of an undefined rank of nobility. They're kind of on this lower level of nobility. They're still nobles, but I'm not saying all of our ancestors, but many, many of our ancestors, there's loads and loads of them who may have noble next to their names. It doesn't mean that they're way up on that level 2. They're probably down here in this level 3 part of the pyramid here. And it doesn't mean it's nothing. It just means that they're kind of middle management, as it were, if you can understand what I mean. So let me go down. I wrote it all down. Oh, yes. So level 4, which I found really interesting. Level 4 are no longer nobility, but they're landowners. However, some nobility are landowners, but not all landowners are nobility. I'll give you an example. In Santa Croce Parish, there's a family called the Farina. they have been landowners for centuries and centuries. Anytime I see them in the books, they are landowners, 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 but they're not nobility, not anything that I can tell anyway. I would think most nobility, not most, but many of them probably have land or are lords over a certain territory. But landowners were a certain kind of people who were not necessarily nobility. They owned the land, and they could then rent out the lands to people to use for farming, houses to live in, and various things like that. So the whole structure was like a pyramid in this way. And then at the very bottom, as you can imagine, the biggest part of the pyramid were what they call the vassals. Now, the vassals were everybody else. And essentially, if you study anything to do with European medieval history, that's pretty much 90% of the population is down there. And they're the farmers and everybody else who lived off the land. Now, so that's, whoops, hold on a second. I lost my notes. I touched the wrong screen and I lost my notes. So that's kind of what Charlemagne did that really affected the lives of our people for about 1,000 years, because feudalism in Trentino wasn't outlawed, wasn't ended, wasn't finished until Napoleon came in. Yet another Frenchman came in at the end of the 1700s. So around the year 1800, so if you go 800 Charlemagne, 1800 Napoleon, there's 1,000 years there. In between these two Frenchmen was all this stratification of society like that. Napoleon officially banned the whole thing. He destroyed the whole, he also got rid of the prince bishops of Trento. I'm not going to talk about the prince bishops of Trento tonight because that's a whole other story. I'm just introducing this idea of this structure. So try to imagine that all of our ancestors lived in that structure for all that time. So it must have been quite radical when it stopped. So the thing I wanted to bring up was, let's see, Louis XIV later changed this to putting the king at the top of the pyramid. Well, yeah, because they were at that point, there were all of these people breaking away from the empire. You have to understand that while Charlemagne kind of saw himself as king of the world, then as other centuries go by, different nations are splitting off from that. England split away from that with Henry VIII. That's, you know, what all this kinds of things happened eventually. But really, the same structure was sustained. Now, the point I'm bringing up about this, and this is where I'm going to go with riddle number 2, but I have to bring up the nobility, is that the people who were well off. Yes and no. Yes, presumably because of what I'm going to say next. Okay, Teresa? When you were at the top of the pyramid, or at least somewhere in the pyramid, you had certain rights. And there was what they had rights to do was to collect rents from the vassals. Now, you have to think of this as a kind of a tax. And that tax, the word for it was actually censo, which in Italian, they say Censimento, which today in English we would call a census. Now, today in English, when we use the word census, we mean, oh, you go around and you write down the population, who lives where and who's the head of the household. But in its original sense, it meant the contribution that the vassals were meant to give to the lords for the privilege of using the lands and the houses. And in exchange, the lords and then the priests and all these other people were supposed to serve the public. They were supposed to protect them, provide them with needs if they ran into trouble. But of course, these systems got corrupted, but that was the idea at the time. So the person who could receive the money was authorized this by various organizations, and there was, I'm not going to go into the whole structure of it, but there was a lot of dispute over many centuries as to whether the church had the authority or the emperor had the authority, or whether it should be localized, or whether it should be the king, the local kings, or the prince bishop, or whatever. So there was a lot of arguing, and that's a whole other story where I'm not going, at least not tonight. Now, the second riddle, and this, I put all of that context so you can understand what the second riddle was. And part of this is brought up because Louise had asked me as a question. She said, yes, Giselle, you're right, not anymore, because the nobles are no more. The nobles don't exist anymore. We like to look at our noble ancestors, but they actually don't exist. The titles don't exist anymore. Louise had asked in last week or the week before, she said, what about older documentation that we can look at that might tell us about our ancestors? How can we go beyond the parish records? What exists? Now, that's a huge subject, so I can't do it all today, but I'm bringing up one thing, and it's related to what I'm talking about tonight. And that's with riddle 2. Now, knowing what I just talked about, feudalism, and looking at riddle 2, if any of you have done any research in this area, riddle 2 is what social custom mentioned in a document from 1170, and that's only because I read it somewhere in a book that I'm going to show you, did our medieval Trentino ancestors adopt from the ancient Hebrews? Have a think about what kinds of practices might have come from the biblical era, and that may have been adopted and adapted to medieval life. Let's see. Anybody, any guesses on that? What's social custom? And I'll show you the document in a minute. I don't want to show you the title of the book because then it'll give away what it's called. So what page is it on? Hold on, I have a picture. I'll show you. Page 24. I'll show you the book in a second, but right now I'll just show you the picture of the document. Oh, I'm covering up the title of what it is. There's the document. Can you see this thing? It's like really impossible to read. It's in Latin. Yes, Gina's got it. It's tithing. Tithing. And the actual word for tithing is, whoops, there we go. Can you hear me here? In this case, is decima. Decima in Italian, anyway. And the reason why it's called decima comes from the word dieci, which means 10. And a decima or decimo means 1/10. Now, traditionally, tithing is 1/10 of one's income or 1/10 of one's crops. And this actually was a practice that began in the time of Moses. Now, why was it introduced? It was introduced then because at that time in the story of the 12 tribes of Israel, there were the Levites who were dedicated to praying. They were dedicated to prayer all the time. So because they were the priests, they were the priestly class or caste, they had no time to farm or do anything for themselves. They were there to pray and lead spiritually the people. So Moses realized, okay, we need them to pray, but they can't take care of themselves because they're not out farming. So he then asked the public to contribute, all the other 11 tribes to contribute 1/10 of their crops, or whatever they generated, for the support of the priestly caste. So that's where it came from. It's thousands of years old. It was not a new idea. Now, when the church came in, they brought this in as an idea. It was actually even used in pre-Christian culture. But the Levites were not allowed to own their own property. Yes, indeed. And so they were meant to be supported so as not to become worldly. Absolutely. This is also true if you look at it in other systems throughout the world. Even in India, the Brahmin class there, although now it's different, originally they were not supposed to own property either. They were supposed to be supported by the public. So it's not a new concept. It's something that actually existed in the world for quite some time. Now, the book that I was reading is this book called La Decima de Priore. Now, Priore is a name of sorry, there you go. It's hard to do because it comes in backwards for me. It's a name of a village in Val Giudicari. At the time of this document that these documents that he's talking about here, and this was written by a priest named Don Ivo Leonardi. And at the time of these documents, Priori actually included what is also in present-day Raguli, and a lot of little villages in that area. It's all on the side of the in Giudicari Interiore, and it's like on the side of a mountain. I know there's a couple of people I know who live there from in this group, I think. But it's a very sweet place. I've got ancestors there. My Serafini ancestors came from there originally. So, right. So, yes, it was already in use by the time Charlemagne came along, but he systematized it. He created this hybrid and this is why also there started becoming debates over whether does the church get this money or is it the state that gets this money, and hence we get a lot of the battles that happened later on in history because of this kind of fighting about who was actually entitled to this. Now, I'm not going to go through some of these things that I wrote down. I wrote down some notes about all the different ways Trentino was divided up into different fiefdoms, and fiefdoms are the areas that were entitled to collect taxes. It's so complicated. If you think you don't understand Trentino history, do you know why? It's because it's really complicated. The boundaries and the who owned this and who owned that and who took taxes for this and who took taxes for that. It was changing all the time. I was looking at this in a document from the Archivio di Stato di Trento, and I was going, "Oh my God, this is you'd have to study this for years to figure out all the ins and outs of everything that was going on." And that's not really what I wanted to talk about tonight. But just to be aware that places like, say, Castelfondo paid taxes to the Thun family, and places like Arco paid taxes to the Counts of Arco, those kinds of things. So it depended on where you lived, who owned the tithe, who owned the fiefdom, and those are the people that you would pay the tithes to. Now, what's interesting about this book is Don Leonardi says, Priori at one point in the year 1211, they got very feisty. They decided not to pay. They said, no, we don't care. We're not going to pay anything. We're not giving you any money. Do you know what happened to them? The church then, I guess it was the bishop, they got excommunicated for 3 years. What that means is that they weren't allowed to have any priests. So they couldn't have any Christian burials. They couldn't have any sacraments. They were excommunicated for 3 years until they decided to pay their taxes, which is kind of amusing, I think. But anyway, one of the reasons why I am bringing this book up is because these kinds of documents do exist for different parishes and different comune around Trentino. I don't know which ones still exist. This one does. If you start searching on the state archives for Censo, like in census, Censo, or Decima. I looked at Decima, that didn't really come up, but Censo, you might start to see records of censuses of tithes being paid, and that's really, really fascinating. Because if I look at here, for instance, I went and looked, and Mary Kay, I think you're in the group tonight. I actually found one of your ancestors here. In this book, this priest has transcribed all of them for many centuries. He's gone through all of the records for this particular village or parish and written down all of the people, the men who were sitting on the council. They call it the sindicato, which could mean a union, but they were kind of like the body of lords in the area who were the head of the body collecting the taxes, and then all of the vassals, meaning the heads of households. And what's really interesting is that as you go through them, it will say what years they sat on the board, and also it may say their fathers, it may say if their fathers were deceased. And in your case, Mary Kay Sheely, I'm talking about, between the years 1640 and 53, I found a name of one of your ancestors in here. I knew you had an ancestor, Pietro Bertelli. I knew he had a son named Antonio, but here it says that this Pietro was also son of an Antonio. So I found another ancestor for you. And Louise is saying several of the Genetti ancestors collected taxes for the Thun family, according to the old Thun family records that you stumbled upon. And that's probably what this is here. See, these people are not the lords who are owed the taxes. These people are the ones who were doing it on behalf of the ones who were owed the taxes. So, Louise, that's probably what you found. These kinds of documents are a way of extending what you are able to find with existing documents. Do they exist for every parish? No idea, but I haven't done an extensive study, but they do exist. And this I find very fascinating. This book, this priest who came from this area, if you have any relatives in Ragoli, um, Priori, that whole area there, this is a fantastic book. It is in Italian, but the whole last half of the book is basically names, dates, and not that hard to figure out. Look for other books like this in your parishes. I would love to know if you find any, like Louise, if you find for Castelfondo, anywhere, Jean, if you find any of these records in, and Vicky also guessed tithing, and I see a few people saying it. If any of you find any books in this category, I would like to buy more to keep them in my library, because they are gold mines of genealogy that can take you beyond the parish records. It can also show you who were the heads of households at which points, who was called sir, who was, if your ancestors are missing there, it could mean that either they were younger or they weren't the oldest son, so they weren't necessarily the one who with the responsibility. So I find this very fascinating. So in answer to the riddle was that Decima, the tithing, the practice of tithing was adopted from biblical era. It was seized by the ideas that Charlemagne had fleshed out with this whole feudal concept. It actually was very, very, very influential in our ancestors' lives, the whole way that the nobles were organized. Another time we'll talk about nobility and things like that. But I just wanted to bring that to you tonight because I thought that was really, really interesting to see all of those names from the 1400s and stuff like that, and going back, some of them even to the 1200s. But sometimes it's hard to make that leap back that far. But if you can find anything like that in either books that have been transcribed, or certainly in the records that are in the Archivio di Stato di Trento, then that would really bring, it's a bit more advanced, but it would bring more life and more interest to the history of your families. So anyways, hi Mia, and hi everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I think I've said everything. Let me just double check. Is there anything else I was going to say? Yes. There was one more thing. In this book, which I found really interesting, page 288, where is it? This was showing, and this may again be in other places, it was showing the names of the vassals who were talking about the heads of household. And it was giving the names, the dates, the years of their deaths, and who took over the vassaldom from that person, usually their heir. And that's interesting because in this particular parish, there are no death records that far back. So here, this is a record of the deaths and saying who took over the vassaldom. So again, yes, this kind of resource can extend your family history even beyond what is available in the records. Great. I'm glad that you found that useful, Wendy. Any comments, any questions, or anything you would like to, I would love to know whether you found this interesting. I would love to know whether you have any tips for me to where you think I should look for more books about this. I would love to know any ideas of other things you want me to talk about next time. But mainly just, how was that? Was that okay? Did you enjoy that? And so I'd love to hear those. I'm actually going to end the live video, and I'll come onto the chat and chat with you to respond to your comments. So my Sebastiano was noted in these records. I found them online several years ago. Yeah, I'm going to look at those. Yes, Louise is mentioning one of my ancestors was named Sebastiano Giannetti from Valdinon, from Castelfondo in Valdinon. And anybody who's a Serafini descendant in Santa Croce is also descended from him, because he was an ancestor of the first couple who were the Serafini in Santa Croce. So anyways, guys, I'm going to sign off for now. Have a wonderful Easter weekend, those of you who celebrate, and those of you who don't. I hope it's sunny and lovely, and I hope you get out at least for some fresh air. And I'm really glad that we have this little community. It's very important to me, and I'm grateful to all of you for being there. And I'll put this up on YouTube, and I'll see you next week. Ciao, ciao. Where is it? Say, and there it is. Bye.